Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about laziness, the topic laziness or sloth, if you want to call it in a different way. It's a very passionate topic for me as someone who plays ice hockey, does a lot of sports, has a pretty disciplined lifestyle. I believe it's something I would like to discuss to you guys, discuss it in a very philosophical, psychological, and theological manner. Those are the three approaches I'm going to pursue today, and I believe that laziness is to some degree misunderstood in many ways, and I'll explain why. But first, let's of course try to understand what the definition of laziness is before we even get on to the details and the depths of that concept. And in short, laziness is, or the definition of laziness is sloth or indolence. It's rejecting an activity or a certain pursuit despite having the ability to exercise that particular activity or pursuit. So in other words, if you know that you have to clean the bathroom but you just don't want to do it because, well, I don't know, you're lazy or you just don't feel like it, well, that is the very exact definition of laziness or being lazy, despite having a lot of energy and capability of doing that particular activity. Now, laziness, or the word laziness, isn't really widely mentioned in the psychological literature. As Leonard Carmichael said it, that the word laziness is not a word that appears in most psychological literature and isn't really discussed in that particular manner. However, though, it's not supposed to be confused with sleep disorders, with schizophrenia, with ADHD, depression, ASD, and so on and so forth. So laziness is not exactly that. It might be a symptom of those disorders that I've mentioned, but it is not the very disorder that we're talking about. And also, it is not to be confused with procrastination, because procrastination is simply delaying things or delaying tasks unnecessarily and pushing it to the very last moment and then doing it. So it's not exactly being lazy, it's just postponing things to the very last minute. Although, again, you could probably argue that laziness is kind of like procrastination, but except laziness, you just don't want to do it at all. Procrastination is really like you are going to do it, but like at the very last minute. That's a little bit tricky to understand in the beginning. So, in short, now I want to really get into the details, into the three approaches that I just mentioned in the beginning: the psychological, the philosophical, and the theological approach to the concept of laziness. Now, laziness, psychologically speaking, reflects a lack of discipline. It basically stems from a low self-esteem, self-confidence, lack of motivation, and a lack of interest. So a person who is lazy will most likely not have any form of interest, any motivation to do any particular activities, to pursue anything worthy of attaining, so to speak. And lastly, it also reflects a lack of self-discipline. But also, contrarily speaking, if you take on too many interests or if you take on too many activities at the same time, you might also lose motivation and lose discipline, lose interest, lose all these things, and may lead to decreasing your focus and attention and having a more pessimistic outlook on your life, because there are just too many things that are overwhelming you, and thus you're gonna eventually lose that type of focus and motivation and discipline, that you're just gonna degrade to being lazy. And also, when one is lazy, one turns to dopamine-oriented activities. This is also something that is a pretty logical conclusion from that. If one person is lazy, then what is he gonna seek? It's something what Arthur Schopenhauer was saying, that we need to fill our souls first before we can pursue any other activities. And so this is usually what happens when someone is lazy. If someone is lazy, the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna seek something that is gonna please you, a more of a hedonistic lifestyle, broadly speaking. So that could be, for example, playing a lot of video games, could be eating a lot of junk food, could be simply doing nothing at home, having things not done, not having a clean house, and so on and so forth. And this is also going to lead to an endless devil's spiral downwards, because the more you are going to leave things unchecked, not done, or unaccomplished, the more crappier you're going to feel, in other words. And it is very hard to get out of this hole, out of this cycle. That's why it's very important to realize and to notice that passive laziness early on as fast as you can, before you really enter that sphere of endless procrastination. And I know procrastination is delaying things at the very end, but that can also be included in laziness, I believe, and simply not doing the things that you're supposed to do. And in short, the more dopamine that is released, the greater intolerance one has for valuing and accepting productive and rewarding action. This is a quote that I took from one particular study that I'll mention in the link down below. So that is the kind of psychological understanding of laziness. Now I want to get to the philosophical understanding of laziness. And I think for that, I actually want to read like a little passage from Friedrich Nietzsche, because I believe it's a very powerful statement he made about the concept of laziness. A traveler who has seen many countries and peoples and several continents was asked what human traits he had found everywhere, and he answered, "Men are inclined to laziness. Some will feel that he might have said with greater justice, they are all timorous. They hide behind customs and opinions. At bottom, every human being knows very well that he is in this world just once, as something unique, and that is no accident, however strange, will throw together a second time into a unity such a curious and diffuse plurality. He knows it, but hides it like a bad conscience. Why? From fear of his neighbor who insists on convention and veils himself with it. But what is it that compels the individual human being to fear his neighbor, to think and act herd fashion, and not be glad of himself? A sense of shame, perhaps, in a few rare cases. In the vast majority, it is the desire for comfort, inertia, in short, that inclination to laziness of which the traveler spoke. He is right, men are even lazier than they are timorous, and what they fear most is the troubles with which any unconditional honesty and nudity would burden them. Only artists hate the slovenly life in borrowed manners and loosely fitting opinions, and unveil the secret, everybody's bad conscience, the principle that every human being is a unique wonder. They dare to show us the human being as he is, down to the last muscle, himself and himself alone. Even more, that in this rigorous consistency of his uniqueness, he is beautiful and worth contemplating, as novel and incredibly as every work of nature, and by no means dull. When a great thinker despises men, it is their laziness that he despises. For one is on account of this that they have the appearance of factory products and seem indifferent and unworthy of companionship or instruction. The human being who does not wish to belong to the mass must merely cease being comfortable with himself. Let him follow his conscience, which shouts at him, "Be yourself." What you are at present doing, opining and desiring, that is not really you. So that was a little statement from Friedrich Nietzsche on the idea or on the concept of laziness. And what he's trying to tell us is that a lot of people are in many ways aware that they only live once, that they only have one life, as far as we know, because we don't know what really happens after we die, essentially. And he's basically trying to say that we are taking a lot of things for granted in this life that we have, and we're not utilizing the opportunities, we're not utilizing the moments that are present before us or that are given to us. What he's also saying is that you should stop being comfortable with yourself and actually get up and go do some things. And that is not the first time that a philosopher has said that. It already began very early on, ever since the first philosophers have appeared in ancient times. And especially the Stoics have been saying that continuously, non-stop, to not degrade yourself to the level of laziness, to not succumb to that point. And again, there are a lot of different literatures, there's a lot of different works that philosophers have written on the concept of laziness. I'm not going to go now through every single philosopher who said what and what book, etc., but you get the point. And the point is that people disregard others highly if they see someone being lazy. Now, the last one is the theological approach, and here I'm going to take the Christian approach. Though I also believe that other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and other religions have a very similar opinion or a similar approach to the concept of laziness. And from a Christian perspective, what I can say is that sloth is indeed a deadly sin. I believe it's part of the 7 deadly sins, or is one of the further mentioned deadly sins. I'm not sure exactly. It basically says that laziness, or sloth as they call it, rejects the gift and nature of God. And especially for the Protestants later on, when church was being divided, so to speak, in the 16th century, for the Protestants, hard work is one of the ways to please God. So especially for the Protestants, they value hard work. And I believe there's this quote where they use oftentimes ora et labora, pray and work. And for them, really, labor is probably perhaps the most precious act of giving back. In other words, it's deliberately wasting time that can be given to God. So if you don't use your time wisely, it's just a waste. For God, it's a waste for you. You are just not maximizing your life, which can be punished accordingly. It's not often discussed in the Bible, the laziness, but there are a few passages but are strongly emphasized that laziness is not the way to go, and it's something for the people to also remember that nobody respects laziness, nobody wants you to be lazy, and so on and so forth. Now, to conclude the whole topic of laziness, I believe that even though laziness is a bad thing, in my opinion, laziness is not exactly the way to live your life. I also believe that having one day a week or a few days a month of just absolutely doing nothing is also ideal, because your body cannot endlessly work and it cannot always function nonstop in a laborious way. I believe that overcoming laziness is actually pretty simple. A lot of people make it more difficult than it seems to. Now, I don't really know where that comes from or where that stems from. Probably because a lot of people on social media talk about it a lot, and there's there's two extremes to that. Like, either you have to really work 24/7, be like Elon Musk and all these other CEOs who are gonna, basically brainlessly work themselves to death, or you're just gonna have the complete other side where people just do absolutely nothing and they say, well, you gotta enjoy life and you gotta, just live the moment, blah 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 blah, stuff like that. So I really believe that, again, as Aristotle said, someone has to really find the middle ground to that approach, because I believe none of those sides are because I believe none of those sides are ideal. And I believe that perfection, I think that is kind of correlated with perfection in some ways. If you're overcoming laziness, or if you're gonna really pursue a really hardcore disciplined lifestyle, perfection kind of comes into play. And if you want to know more about perfectionism, we have a podcast on the nature of perfectionism, which you can check it out later down in the link below. But perfectionism is in some ways, well, I wouldn't say like a disturbance or an illness per se, but it definitely causes you to become more egocentric and even narcissistic in some ways, if it really gets bad to that point. So I believe that you have to be careful when overcoming laziness and turning your life into more of a disciplined lifestyle. And also don't forget to reward yourself accordingly, to make sure that you feel like you're making progress, to actually give yourself some applause, some pat on your back, because otherwise you're just gonna endlessly work and never feel anything changing. And that is probably the reason why one of the reasons I would say why people lose motivation along the way or along the path of achieving a particular goal is that they don't get enough feedback, I would say. And positive feedback is also just as equally important as constructive feedback or criticism in a constructive way. But to also just discuss about the current society that we are living in, if you want to really just talk about the physical approach of laziness, I'm talking about obesity, I'm not talking about people just being fat. I really believe that people have really gone off the rails these days. And it's really sad to see that people have just really succumbed to the level of laziness to a really big degree that people are not even caring about their own health and taking all kinds of crappy food and not exercising and not trying to maintain their own health. I mean, this is really crazy insane to even just look at the people around you. And it wasn't like that just 70, 80 years ago. I mean, if you take a look at some of the pictures at the beach in 1950s, you're not going to see any obese people, maybe like one or two, but like that was about it. Nowadays, you have like a whole beach full of whales flopping around on the beach, basically. And that is not a good sign. I mean, I don't mean it like in a light way, but yeah, I mean, if people are going to keep choosing the path of laziness and the path of going down the drains like that, then, well, I'm very sorry for them. But, well, no, I'm not really sorry for them, actually, because that's what they deserve after all. And they really don't deserve anything else other than that. So it really comes down to you realizing the fact that you have only one health, one life, one body, and you got to make sure that you keep and maintain your health in a very good way. And that is really, I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. Like, I don't even need to explain to you why this is good or why this is bad. Like, you have your own brain, essentially. And the things that I just talked about are some of the things that a lot of people in the past have discussed that. And it is very obvious, but still, I don't know, maybe human nature is just designed that way, that even though we are given those lessons and even though that we're given those explanations, people just still don't seem to understand or grab or grip on that concept, regardless of how many warnings you get and how many times you were explained. I have no idea. I really have to do a research on that. So yeah, people make their own choices. I'm really someone who is laissez-faire, let people do what they want to do. If you want to be fat and stupid and ugly and not taking care of yourself, well, so be it. Your fault, honestly. Like, it's your fault. You're not gonna blame anyone else but yourself, essentially. But if you also choose the path of discipline and wisdom, knowledge, courage, all these things, I'm good. I'm proud of you, But like I said, everyone makes their own decisions. I'm just saying what I personally believe is right. You can highly disagree with me. I'm pretty sure there are going to be people who are going to disagree with me on that topic, even though I honestly believe that people who are fat really don't understand the consequences. And I'm talking about the people who purposely make themselves fat. I understand some people have health conditions. I understand some people have health problems and other things that they cannot really control. I totally have understanding for that, but I'm talking about the people who purposely chug a bunch of chicken nuggets into their throats every day and then eventually become fat. Like, those are the people I'm talking about. And those are the types of people that I'm addressing. So I hope that does not confuse any of these differences in the end. So yeah, this kind of wraps up today's episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed this little video, this little session discussion of the topic of laziness. If you guys have any further questions or further topic ideas, please feel free to share them. I'll definitely take a look at them. And on that note, I hope you guys have a nice day. Take care.